And now we're going live.
Okay.
I don't know what it every year it does this to me. Every week. Okay, now we are live. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Sorry, we're about 2 minutes behind. Again, you would think after 4 years I've got this down. Unfortunately, apparently I don't. Because every time I try to do this, something happened with Facebook Live. But I'm excited to be here this afternoon to talk about housing, all things housing and development. And I'm so grateful for two amazing housing experts joining us this afternoon to talk about housing, all things bonds fund, the housing fund. I told Ashley before we came live that I was at Pastor First Corinthians Church this morning, and Pastor Ronnie Mitchell was talking about housing in Nashville, and the comments that he made that really spoke to me was that there's a lot of development going on in Nashville and going on, especially in the Black and Brown community, and it does not seem as if our community have the opportunity to benefit from this growth. We cannot do the type of housing that we want. We cannot get money to develop the way that we want. Churches wants to do housing. They don't know what to do. And as soon as he spoke, I was like, hey, Reverend Mitchell, it's as if you know what we're talking about this afternoon because we passed a bill that actually says 20% of bonds fund should now go to small developers or small businesses. And what that means is that the small projects, the churches can actually be a part of this. And so I'm so grateful that this is a need in our community. It's something that we're trying to address, but how do we connect the people to the resources? Now that the resource is there, we need to make sure that people know about it and that people know how to take advantage of it. To that end, I'm very glad that Miss Ashley Brown is with us. She's with the Bonds Fund, and she's going to be able to talk to us about all things Bonds Fund, especially the 20% allocation to the small businesses. So at this point, I'm going to turn it to Ashley. Ashley, is all yours. Tell us exactly what it is. Tell us what people need to do. Tell us how we're going to do it. Folks on Facebook, if you have any question, please put it in the chat. Talk to us about it. We want to make sure that we're addressing your question as we go by. Thank you so much. Comments, chats, comments, questions in the chat. I'll be looking for them. And Ashley, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak a little bit about the Barnes Fund. Pardon my environment. I am actually in the process of moving. So talking about housing and moving at the same time, it seems almost serendipitous, right? We're talking about the exact thing that I am going through in my own life. So thank you to the council member. She is actually on the Barnes Housing Trust Fund Commission. So she sits in our Housing Trust Fund Commission meetings all the time. She gets to listen to the applications that come through the Barnes Fund, how we're awarding, what we're awarding, our eligibility criteria, our grant policies. And so she's been on the commission for almost 2 years now. So she's gotten to see a lot of growth and changes as it applies to the Barnes Housing Trust Fund. I'm going to share my screen just now so that way we can talk a little bit about my presentation. The Barnes Housing Trust Fund was created in 2013 specifically to address barriers to affordable housing for nonprofit developers. And so the Barnes Housing Trust Fund specifically services nonprofits and nonprofit partnerships to create affordable housing in Nashville, Davidson County. So there's a couple of limitations there, right? It has to be in Davidson County to be eligible. The nonprofit has to be the grantee. We do allow for JV partnerships, and I'll go into that a little bit more in just a second. But the Barnes Fund started and is named after Reverend Bill Barnes, who was a longtime community advocate in Nashville around many different aspects of living in Nashville. But one of his focus areas was housing. And all through the 90s, our great housing community and housing advocacy groups in Nashville really catalyzed the start of the Barnes Fund. It was created in 2013 during Carl Dean's administration and has been around now. This is the 10-year anniversary. So it was capitalized by just about $250,000 in 2013. And now the annual budget for Barnes is about $20 million. So you can see the growth and how much that has changed over just the last 10 years. So going a little bit into the eligibility for the Barnes Fund, like I said, Barnes Fund funds affordable housing projects and developments. And so that specifically covers new construction of rental developments, the new construction of home buyer opportunities, and then owner occupied rehab programs. So this funding is not intended specifically for individuals. We specifically fund organizations that serve individuals. And so we're just one removal step from the actual folks that are going to be living in the housing, the residents. But we fund the nonprofits who either provide the housing or provide the rehab programs for those individuals living in the actual home buyer units. For the AMI requirements, and just to go kind of a little bit further back than talking about the requirements, AMI stands for the area median income. Each year, HUD releases, and HUD is the Housing and Urban Development Organization at a federal level. They release something called the area median income limits for each metropolitan statistical area across the US. That's a lot of different terms that can be hard to stomach, but essentially what it says is that here's the median income for any given zip code, and that is what guides us to say what is affordable. The reason we use those HUD limits and those HUD incomes is because a lot of federal funding and other grant programs use AMI. And so if we were to deviate from using AMI, it makes it more difficult for those developers to actually apply for both our funding and other funding to leverage it later on. And so what that means is 100% of the area median income is the actual median income for the Nashville, Davidson County Metropolitan Statistical Area. It incorporates 11 counties around Nashville, including Davidson County, and that just provides a general range of what that income level is. To be able to qualify for our funding, those nonprofit developers have to build the housing intended for 60% of the area median income for rental projects, and then 80% of the area median income for home buyer and home rehab programs. So what that kind of looks like on the ground level, we just got new HUD area median income limits this week. And so they come out every spring, they're updated every year. The area median income for Nashville, 100% of area median income now is about $102,000. And so we're just waiting on what those income limits are for 60% and 80% now. But you can find those on our website and what that means for the actual income limits to be able to actually live in those units once they're constructed. Eligible developers are, again, nonprofit entities or nonprofit joint venture where the nonprofit retains at least 51% of control of the entity. Typically, that looks like a nonprofit and a for-profit coming together to build the housing, and the nonprofit retains 100% of control of the general partnership that's created. That's what we see most often in our applications, but we're open to other partnership structures as long as you can prove that the nonprofit retains the control of the entity or the housing created. And the reason that we do that is because the Barnes Fund is intended to serve nonprofits. And so we want to be sure that even when for-profit entities are coming in a joint venture, that the nonprofit is not being taken advantage of or is not being used only to access the funding. We really want the nonprofit to have a vital part in the partnership and what the housing looks like at the end of the build. For zoning, we do encourage site control, strong site control. That means a signed sales contract, deed in hand, or another method. A contract is okay, or an option contract. These are all weighted a little bit differently on our scoring matrix. But essentially having strong site control ensures that from the Barnes perspective that this housing can move forward and be built in a more timely manner. Our contract periods are 2 years. And we do typically see first extensions on those. So we do have an extension policy, but our first contract is 24 months if awarded. And then the affordability term for those projects is 30 years. That means that a deed of restrictive covenant is placed on the land if it receives Barnes funding to help it remain affordable for that 30 years. That applies to rental projects and that applies to homeownership opportunities as well. So if you create a home as a nonprofit developer and that home is then sold, the restrictive covenant says that that home can only be sold at affordable 80% of the area median income until the affordability term expires in 30 years after final use and occupancy. For for owner occupied rehab programs, they require a 5-year forgivable lien for any rehab that is over $10,000 invested in any one unit, or I'm sorry, $5,000 invested in any one unit. And so what that looks like is if the Barnes subsidy in the actual home is $5,000 or less, it doesn't require a lien. But if it is over $5,000 and that nonprofit is putting over $5,000 of Barnes money in any one homeowner project that they are doing throughout their rehab program, a 5-year forgivable lien is included in a deed of trust for that homeowner. So that way it just knocks down 20% each year until the lien is forgiven. If it's sold prior to the lien period, those lien proceeds are taken out of the sale of the home. For financial standing, we do encourage folks to have a positive cash flow and operating budget equal to or greater than the grant request. This is primarily so that we make sure our nonprofit partners are protected and they're not getting in over their head with construction projects, because we know that the debt can be large. And so we want to make sure that they're able to, if something goes awry, that they're still not going to be underwater. These are 2 Metro legal requirements and Metro finance requirements for our contracts with Metro. So an audit is required for organizations that are over $500,000 in their operating budget, and CPA prepared financials are required for organizations with an operational flow of $500,000 to $200,000. Anything below that, there are other stipulations outlined in Unicode, but we'd want to have a conversation first before we move forward with that application and make sure that the organization understands the scope of the project and we can work with them on what that would look like. For the affordability term, I already kind of mentioned this a little bit, but it's a 30-year affordability term with a restrictive covenant. It says restricted here, it's restrictive, sorry. But the 5-year forgivable lien, again, for rehab over $5,000 in any one unit. The contract period is 24 months. I really got ahead of myself. I talked about all this stuff already, but again, 24 months. And then we do have an extension policy because we know as the Barnes Fund and as a housing trust fund, that construction a lot of times takes longer than 2 years, especially because a lot of our funding is granted in the pre-development stage, meaning that we are some of the first money into a deal. So a lot of times financing hasn't closed, or there are other general requirements to be done, like the builder's permits and those kinds of things prior to construction actually taking place. So the development pipeline can be quite long, especially for our smaller organizations. And so the contract period is 24 months for that initial contract if awarded. And then there is an extension policy for first, second, and third extensions, and anything beyond that would be on a case-by-case basis with the Housing Trust Fund Commission. All extensions are required to go in front of the Housing Trust Fund Commission and then Metro Council for review prior to approval. But that's why we have a pretty standardized process around them, because it is business as usual for us. We do a lot of first extensions, especially. For the developer fee, developer fee must be equal to or less than 20% of the Barnes request as paid by Barnes. So that means that if you submit a budget to us and your developer fee is 30% of your total project cost, you'd have to outline what percentage of that is Barnes in order to still be eligible, because Barnes will only fund up to 20%. But our scoring matrix does favor organizations who have a lower percentage of Barnes funding for the developer fee, and it goes down to 10% on there. There are links at the end of our slides that will show you what those links are and how to access some of our application materials and some of those things. And so I've also shared PDF versions of that with a council member, so she can share those things wherever she deems necessary, or you can contact her directly to get those slides if you need a refresher. Somebody texted me and said the slides look a little bit blurry on Facebook Live, so I apologize for that, but I'll do the best I can to make sure that I am talking about everything specifically. So that way I'm not just generally covering something that's not read aloud. For general eligibility, there is a 70-point threshold for consideration, meaning you have to get at least 70 points out of the possible 120 points in order to be considered in the application process. The scoring matrix is updated and put on our website prior to every application opening. And then we also do have open meetings after the application opens for questions from prospective applicants. So we have an open meeting where folks can come and ask questions about the scoring matrix, about the application. We can't answer very specific questions about the specific scope of people's applications. That would be a conflict of interest. However, we do record all of the open meetings and put those on our website as well so people can view them later. The open meetings from our last funding round that is in the process of closing now are still on our website. We keep our application materials on there year round. So our previous scoring matrix, our application questions are on there in a PDF format. All the applications are through an online process, but we like to keep the application questions available year round. So that way you can kind of start preparing that boilerplate narrative over time and not feel really rushed in that 30-day window to get your actual application uploaded once an application cycle opens. So all those materials are online. Again, the links will be at the end. But that's a really helpful way, especially for our smaller organizations. I know you guys don't have grant writers on staff. It's really tough. And so if it's just you, especially in a nonprofit environment, I know that you have like 7 jobs you're doing, the least of all writing a grant for something. So in understanding that, we really like to keep the application questions open year round. So that way you can at least start preparing ahead of time and not feel rushed in that 30-day window, like I said. For the next funding round, typically those are determined by the budget. And so this conversation is a little bit different. I know the council member has a lot of these conversations specifically around the budget. I'm not talking so much about the budget specifically today. However, the allocation for our next funding round will be determined by the allocation that we receive in the Metro budgeting process. The budget hearing for the housing division, of which Barnes is part of that, is actually on Monday. So tune in to the MNN or wherever you watch those, and you can see the full presentation of how Barnes plays into the rest of the housing division. Barnes is really one part of a big toolbox of housing resources and housing tools, albeit the longest standing tool since it's been around 10 years. But Barnes is just one aspect of our housing division resources. And so at the end of this as well, I do have a document that outlines some developer resources that are not Barnes that tackle different barriers to entry for folks that aren't specifically grant funding for nonprofits. And I've shared that with the council member as well, and she can share those with you all. But we're just talking about Barnes today. So typically the commission, after the council proposes and approves a budget for the fiscal year 24, the Housing Trust Fund Commission will reconvene in usually August and look at the allocation and say, okay, how much do we want to put toward a fall round or a spring round before the next budget cycle? And that typically happens in August. They'll approve an allocation and a timeline for the next round. Again, as the council member mentioned, she did a really great job at codifying some language for small organizations in the Metro Code for the Barnes Fund. And so there is a 20% budget allocation specifically for small organizations. And how that looks for the Housing Trust Fund Commission and the grant policy now is that means that organizations with a budget of under $2 million for housing, they are part of that small organization set aside. Those requests are capped at $750,000. So if you're a small organization, you can apply for that small organization priority subsection up to $750,000. And what that typically means is that those small organizations are considered against other small organizations. And that way, those small organizations are only compared to other small organizations rather than comparing a small organization to our large organizations that have on-staff grant writers or have these huge LIHTC deals. That means low-income housing tax credit, where the budgets are much bigger, the developer fees are bigger, the unit counts are bigger, but there's a lot more organizational capacity. And so the small organization subsection is really just a way to separate those two and not compare apples to oranges, because all affordable housing developments aren't the same, right? And we know that smaller organizations need a little bit more time and consideration to their projects. And we don't want to compare those to much larger organizations that have much more organizational capacity. Again, those applications, the allocation and timeline is typically reviewed in August, and then those applications typically open in mid-September. Again, that's all kind of dependent on what the Housing Trust Fund Commission decides. We as staff don't make unilateral decisions on when an application opens, how much it's going to be available, or what the timeline is. That is all decided by the Housing Trust Fund Commission. And so after August, I would assume at that time, we would be able to communicate more directly about how much will be available, how much will be available specifically for the small organization subsection, what the eligibility criteria will be, because each year the Housing Trust Fund Commission looks at its eligibility criteria, make sure there aren't any additional barriers there they can adjust, or if they need to add something or add policies for the future year, depending on what happened in the last fiscal year. And so again, all of that will be decided in August, and then typically the fall round would open mid to late September. Again, for Barnes funding specifically, everything that is granted through Barnes is on a reimbursement basis. That means that an award is made, we go into a contract period, Metro Council reviews those contracts. If approved, those contracts are executed, but there is a draw schedule, and that draw schedule can be altered depending on the project or development, but typically it looks like a 5-stage draw cycle, where at each interval of those the project, there is a draw amount associated with work that is completed. So in order to access the funds that are granted for the Barnes Fund, you'd have to turn in invoices, receipts, pay app applications from your general contractors, things like that, to show that the work has been completed. Once you turn in that financial draw request, then we have a third-party inspector that Metro pays for, that coordinates with the nonprofit to go out to the site and actually make sure that the site work is complete. So if you have an item that's like 25% of your draws come from the footing and framing and foundation, then we would see the financial documentation that work has been completed. We send that to our inspector. The inspector goes out, takes photographs, creates an inspection report documenting that work has been completed. And then he turns all of that back into the Barnes staff, and we complete the draw, and then the grantee is paid out. So there are additional steps that are taken in order to access the funding for Barnes, but we have to be really cautious about what we're funding and how we're paying it out, because these are taxpayer dollars. And we want to make sure that the Housing Trust Fund Commission, the Barnes staff, and the Metro Housing Division are really good stewards of taxpayer dollars for affordable housing. And that's why the process can be a little bit more lengthy, but we are also dealing with something that requires a high level of supervision and compliance. This is kind of a general timeline just to give you an overview of how the grant cycles run. So an application would open, typically the application's open for 30 days, maybe longer, but never shorter. And we do hold open meetings during that time. Questions are only answered in written format. We don't take one-on-one meetings during open applications, again, only to prevent conflicts of interest. And then an application would close 30 days later. We then enter an internal and external review period. So on our scoring matrix, you will see what outlined is graded by staff or scored by staff. And typically those are very operational questions like, did you include an audit? Is the developer fee this percentage? Those kinds of yes, no questions. And then the external review committee is comprised of community stakeholders that have a background in housing. So we typically have folks from a finance background, folks that are in architecture, folks that are in design, folks that are in sustainability and resiliency. Sometimes we have folks from health equity backgrounds. Sometimes we have all these different intersectional aspects of housing. We try to get folks with a myriad experience in order, and diversity, equity, inclusion is part of that, to make sure that we're looking at an application from multiple perspectives and not only the developer perspective. And then that is scored on our scoring matrix as well as to what those more subjective criteria are on our scoring matrix that the external review committee scores. Those, the external review committee then sends a funding recommendation to the Housing Trust Fund Commission. The Housing Trust Fund Commission then reviews those recommendations and makes awards to the actual applicants that will be then grantees. Once they're notified of those awards, we enter another 30 days of a contract period that's putting together the contract that Metro Council will review, including all of the exhibit documents, all of the budgeting and the information that has to go into a Metro contract, and then also finalizing that draw schedule that I outlined and mentioned before. That then goes back to the Housing Trust Fund Commission, who votes on the contract. So they're notified of any changes in contracts prior to going to Metro Council. And then we go to Metro Council after the commission votes on those contracts. And so we do award land through the Barnes Fund. So we do have delinquent tax lots available that can be applied for through the Barnes Fund. The Barnes Fund will only consider land donation as a part of a larger financial award. So if you are applying for land, you have to apply for money to build the housing on the land that's awarded. But we do have a land donation policy. Again, that's on our website. And then if awarded land or property and a financial award, it goes into something called mandatory referral. That takes about 30 days for Metro departments to review that we are granting that land donation. And then if it's just a financial award, that goes straight to Metro Council. And so Metro Council will then review all of the contracts as part of a larger piece of legislation before approving it. And hopefully they approve that, those contracts, and then we enter the actual 24-month contract draw period. And so hopefully that project's finished in 24 months. If not, then it goes into an extension after that period, but there is some reporting along the way, typically an interim report that happens halfway, and then a final report at the end of the grant period that will include pictures of the actual housing that was built, a copy of the restrictive covenants that were filed, and then some general questions about barriers that were encountered during the grant process, or some typical Likert scale questions as well, like highly agree, highly disagree about the actual Barnes grant process. So that's a very high level overview of the Barnes Fund. It was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So I understand if you have additional questions, I'm happy to answer those. I will say that my last day with Metro is actually next week. We're moving across the country, so I won't be with Metro much longer, but we do have a great Barnes team. The contact information that's listed here, if you can't see it, I'm sorry, but it's for our grants analyst. Her name is Rashida Pardue. She started with us in late October of last year. So she will be staying on as the Barnes Housing Trust Fund grants analyst. And then we have also hired somebody to replace me. Her name is Karen Weaver, and I've shared that with all of our grantees, but I'm happy to share that information so that there's a continuous contact for the Barnes Fund once I'm gone. So Karen and Rashida will be your best contacts for the Barnes Fund and any questions that you have moving forward. But if you have any questions today, I'm happy to answer those while I'm still here.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate it. Thank you for that high-level overview of the Barnes Fund. And also, thank you for the work that you've done. It's been a pleasure working with you. We're going to really miss you, but wish you the very best where you're going. Folks, this is housing. It's a lot to unpack, but I'm willing, if my guests are willing to stay longer than 4 o'clock, because if you have questions, we want to make sure that we get to all of them. So if any of you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat box and we will be sure to address them. As I'm looking for the question and comments, I have a couple that I want to walk through with you. And I know Marshall is there, is listening. I haven't had him talk yet, but I'll keep notes of some of the question, Marshall, in case when you come on, you want to talk about them too. And so, Ashley, what I wanted to ask is this. There's a lot of information that you unpack. And for a lot of small businesses, that's some of the reason why they're not doing it, because it looks as if there's just so many oops to jump. And so can you go over what are some of the barriers to the small businesses, and what are some of the ways that people can address this? Because it's no use if we're putting money aside and nobody's using it. And it's no use if we have a lot of policy, but then we create so many barriers for people to get it. So you've been in position for a long time. You've dealt with a lot of these applications. What are some of the things that you think is causing or may cause somebody that is interested not to be able to do it? And what are your recommendations for how to go about that?
Yeah. And I definitely understand the struggle, especially for our smaller developers, as to why there are so many hoops to jump through. Why do I have to have every pre-development plan already in place? Why do I need site plans and construction plans and construction specifications already? And at a high level, the reason that the Barnes Fund requires all of those things before we grant that money out is because it is taxpayer dollars. We really want to make sure that the housing is an asset to the community, and we truly believe that the affordable housing that is built through the Barnes Fund can be not only just housing for people with moderate and low incomes, but also some of the best housing in the community. And so that is why we require so many different hoops to jump through in order to get that funding. Now, on the other side of that, what I really recommend to folks that are just dipping their toes into the housing field, especially for service focused nonprofits where your background isn't in housing. And that's okay. We're not expecting service focused nonprofits to all of a sudden get a degree in being a developer and understanding land use and how to get building permits and all of those things. What I really recommend is reaching out and doing peer learning with other smaller nonprofits that have done housing, or reaching out to some of those larger developers that have received funding from us in the past, or have received other low-income housing tax credits, or have received other or have built affordable housing near you, to either do peer learning from them or a mentorship from them, or really to create that partnership where the for-profit and the nonprofit come together into that JV structure. That can be extremely helpful, because it means that you as a nonprofit can still do what you do best, which is focus on the services that you're providing the people that need your nonprofit, while the person that is running the housing part of it can help you build that housing and get it done in a timely manner, so that way your organization can start to utilize it. So I really recommend that partnership structure, and that's not always possible for everybody, but I will say that there are other developer resources out there. I would highly recommend reaching out to folks that have done the RED Academy, the Real Estate Developers Academy from Urban League of Middle Tennessee. Some of those are actually folks that have gone through our Barnes process and have been Barnes grantees. So they're a great resource to learn from in that regard. Also, Pathway has a contractor program, and really Barnes does not focus on general contractors or contractors specifically, especially because it's building the housing and also it's for nonprofits. But that can also be a good resource for you to learn about the built environment and the environment for housing in Nashville as well. So there are resources out there. Barnes is definitely not a one-stop shop, and it's hard, especially because our team has been so small for so long. We are growing, we are expanding. We've doubled in size in just a year, but we still don't have technical assistance or those kinds of things specifically for the Barnes Fund. But I will say that if you do apply through the application process, if you're not awarded, even if you are awarded, you can still do this, but especially for those folks that are declined through the Barnes process, I always have a time to set up with those folks that were declined and walk through all of the aspects of their application and go over how they scored, what they could do better, where the opportunities for growth are. So we're not just giving you a score, telling you that you are not awarded and leaving you high and dry. I really like to say that, especially with grant writing, you're turned down a lot more often than you're awarded, but it only takes that one time to be awarded. So sitting down with me or Rashida or Karen in the future to go over an application, even if you're declined, and see where you can grow in that application to make it better for a future round is extremely helpful. And we've had numerous grantees go through that process to redo their application for a future round, and they may have been declined one round and came back and were awarded another round. So that process of going through how to fix or correct or cure an application, even if you're declined, is extremely helpful. And I would recommend that to anybody as a learning process. If you haven't gone through that before, or you've been declined by the Barnes Fund before and haven't done that, we can always go back to a previous application and start from there too. But just not during an open application cycle because of conflict of interest. So right now, like until we open another another application cycle, this would be a good time to do that.
Actually, I want you to address part of what the 20% is supposed to do was also to do capacity building and to help these small businesses as they come up. I know that the Housing Fund is discussing some of this, and I know the mentorship program is one of the things we're looking at. Do you know, and I know you're on your way out, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but what are some of the other things that we can do with the Barnes Fund within that 20% to help with capacity building so that some of this organization, because if you're saying go and learn and go and do, some of them don't have the money to start with. And so is that something that we can put as part of what we're doing, in your opinion, with the capacity building?
Capacity building is a really vague concept, right? There are many concepts to capacity building in general. I would say that if you want to take a really strict view on capacity building, by the nature of funding small organizations, we are building their capacity by expanding their portfolio so they're able to leverage more money in the future. So that is an aspect of capacity building. There are a lot of different real estate development ways to learn that already exist. And so Barnes doesn't want to then go and repeat something that's already being done by 3 different organizations. However, I think that the Barnes Housing Trust Fund Commission is really committed to expanding what capacity building means for the Barnes Fund while still staying in the scope of the Barnes Fund and what its mission is set out to be in its enacting legislation from 2013. That's really the guiding light for Barnes as to what we fund and why we fund it. And we can't really go outside of that. But I think the Barnes Fund has gone through a couple of different iterations of strategic planning and will continue to move that direction. And that's where I see this position that I'm now vacating, but somebody else is coming into it, that there's a lot of room for some strategic visioning on what the Barnes Fund can do in the future. The biggest barrier to doing capacity building rounds, Barnes did one capacity building round in 2016, I believe, where we funded a couple of full-time employees for a couple of different organizations to do pre-development work. And that was pretty successful, but we would also want to evaluate how successful it was and what the community really needs now, given that there are other programs doing other types of pre-development support, technical assistance, and real estate portfolio building. So I think that there's still room to expand what that means, but the Barnes Housing Trust Fund will really have to take that on. And this position will be in charge of spearheading that conversation, but ultimately that decision will have to be made by the Barnes Housing Trust Fund Commission and how they decide that capacity building and what that means for the Barnes Fund and the future. A couple of things have to happen before that conversation, I think, which is the Unified Housing Strategy in Nashville. That's something that the Housing Division and Angie Hubbard, who is our Housing Director of Nashville, has been really spearheading. That study will really look at all of the built environment for affordable and attainable and workforce housing in Nashville and really help us evaluate what the recommendations are for the Barnes Fund as part of a larger toolbox. Right, like I said, Barnes Fund can't solve the affordable housing crisis by itself. It's part of a much larger toolbox of resources for developers. And so I think once that's completed, we have solid recommendations from that. We have time with the commission to go over what these other new tools are doing already, what our fellow folks in the community, our other nonprofits teaching smaller organizations and smaller developers, and really evaluate what the capacity building need is from Barnes. So I think it's an ongoing conversation. I've certainly documented my thoughts and my ideas for where it can go from here. But ultimately, that'll just take a little bit of time and building for the Housing Trust Fund Commission, a lot of deep conversations there. So I know council member, you're really good about pushing them in that direction. And so I have no doubt they'll continue those conversations about what that might mean for a future round.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley. We're going to continue that conversation. And I do believe that having those resources or having a place with all the information about what we have, what we need, is going to help everyone in this housing conversation that we continue to have. I want to do a little recap and then I'll go to Marshall. And like I said, everyone, if you bear with me, I think we might go a little bit of over 4 today, but I think it's a conversation that is very serious and much needed. Folks, I'm looking in the comments. I do not see your question. And so please, if you do have any question or comments, feel free to put it in there. You've got the experts here. And remember, we have Ashley until next week. So don't make me have to call long distance, although we have two capable people that are there now, so that will be working with us. So we'll ask them as well. But this is your opportunity to ask the questions. And that's why we're here, so that we can address anything that you have. Really quickly, what I heard is that so let's say, for example, a church wants to develop the land in their lot, and they want to provide affordable housing. As a church who is not in the business of doing development, they will need a developer to help them with that. It is very important that when you're asking for bonds fund, that you have half of what you're asking. And so, if you're asking for 500,000, for example, that means you should at least have a cash flow of about 250,000. It's also saying that you can work with a larger developer to look into. Well, you don't have the 500,000, or you can go through the audit. This is not where you can start immediately, but maybe you can find other developers and work together as a team, or find a developer that is already doing it, and then you can start under them until you're able to do on your own. One thing that is also very important that I heard is that as part of building affordable housing, once we have an inventory of all the land that Metro has, especially for tax sales, then you can actually have a land donation where Metro can give you land that you can build on. I think that is amazing. So there's a lot of things happening. We just need to make sure that we keep building on it, and we keep making sure that people know what those resources are. Again, I'm going to be
Can I
looking.
jump in on one more thing? So you
Okay.
mentioned a little bit about the matching funds and the cash flow. So cash flow, yes, we just want to make sure that the nonprofit's not underwater. But for the specific request, Barnes will fund up to 50% of any one deal. So we'll pay up to 50% of a housing development, not any more than that, but up to 50%. Specifically, this is helpful for our smaller nonprofits that might not have as much funding to leverage. But you can also be really creative about what other funding is coming into that deal. So, and I'm sure Marshall can talk about some of these, but things like the CITC loan, which is specifically for community development for nonprofits, or the you could do LIHTC funding can be part of that. Your for-profit partner can be your guarantor on some of that financing. And so this doesn't have to mean that you specifically are matching 50% of the deal in cash from your organization. You can be more creative about structuring your capital stack, so that way it's comprised of multiple funding sources and not just relying on Barnes cash and the organizational equity. It can be more than one of those. And I really recommend diversifying that capital stack. Number one, it's more points on our scoring matrix. But number two, it also means that you have more money in the deal and more accountability partners to ensure that the housing's completed, and also access to more cash.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. I think that's very good. And I think I remembered one of the housing fund meeting. What was said is that you can actually go to a lender and said, I'm applying for bonds fund, and I'm going to be getting half of it from the bonds fund. And so maybe there's a way to use one to help you with the other. And then once you get it, then you use that to be able to go to bonds and said, now I've got the other half. I want to now talk about financing. I want to talk about all the other stuff that is outside of bonds, but we got a guru on housing finance on the individual side, helping people staying home. The housing fund is doing amazing work, and Marshall has been in this, and he can talk about everything housing. I was in Leadership Tennessee with Marshall, and when you say housing, everybody knows it's Marshall, and every aspect of it from the beginning, individual to businesses to funding. This is our guy. So at this point, Marshall, you heard the conversation. We're trying to look into getting more development. Housing crisis is a big thing in Nashville, whether it's developing it, keeping people in their home. I want you to talk about the housing fund, and I want you to just jump into this conversation, what the housing fund does, and tell us about that one. And then you've had the conversation we've had so far with the bonds fund. Is there anything there that you can add to? At this point, I'll throw it over to you, my friend. And thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Councilwoman. Really appreciate this. And thank you, Ashley, for sharing as much as you have about the Barnes Fund, which I think is a critical resource for developing housing. In particular, I know everybody uses affordable, attainable, or whatever type of housing. We're just talking about housing that people at low and moderate income levels can be able to afford to get into. And so having small developers that are able to participate in this is critical. This is not just a government issue or a nonprofit issue. It's an industry issue as well. And so we need as many players participating in developing housing as possible, because the housing crisis is not just about developing more housing, it's also about preserving as well. And so the Barnes Fund doesn't just provide for creating new affordable housing, it also provides for preserving affordable housing also. We know that there is a supply issue, and the reason why there's a supply issue because the affordable housing stock that once existed is no longer available because so many people are not moving out of those units and making it available, or we're not creating enough units to be able to meet the demand that exists. For the Housing Fund, we've been around for over 20 some years. Actually, we were created in 1996 because there was an affordable housing crisis in Nashville. There you have it. In 1996, we were dealing with the same thing. And here we are in 2023, still talking about an affordable housing crisis. The Housing Fund's primary mission is to provide resources and creative leadership to help individuals and communities create and maintain affordable and healthy places for low and moderate income people to live. Provide resources. That is a critical piece of what we do. The creative leadership is about the technical assistance and providing information like what we're doing here today. We don't just provide it to just consumers and providing them with opportunity to get down payment assistance and closing costs, but we also provide it to developers that want to build communities and making sure that we are, one, creating units, and two, preserving those units in those communities that we're trying to serve. Why have the Housing Fund speak on this? Because of the one thing that we were talking about at the very end there is that the Barnes Fund is about a reimbursement, meaning that you got to have a capital to be able to initiate the project and then submit those receipts for reimbursement if you get approved. Well, the Housing Fund has worked with many nonprofits throughout, not just here in Nashville, but throughout the entire state of Tennessee. But here in Nashville, we have worked with many nonprofits and providing them with a line of credit or resources for them to be able to leverage getting Barnes resources and then being able to start the project and the pre-development work, the acquisition aspect of it, and also the construction financing piece. As well. And so many nonprofits have utilized us for that reimbursement aspect of it. I'm going to share with you in a few moments, because all of you, what are the terms and conditions? That's what everybody wants to know when you're talking about borrowing capital, terms and conditions. Ashley talked a little bit about the capital stack. Well, a major part of that capital stack is the debt financing that you have. Most of the time, the financial institutions provide it to you at a 65 or 75%. And with the economy the way that it is right now, it's hard finding adequate capital out there that the financial institutions are going to lend. in particular on large projects. We may be able to still get it on smaller projects, but it's becoming that more difficult because the financial institutions are really concerned with liquidity issues and trying to preserve their capital. So what does that do? That opens it up the opportunity for working with a CDFI, a community development financial institution, which the housing fund is. And what does that mean? It means that we lend capital to be able to help projects, smaller projects and large projects, be able to do more affordable housing and serve more low to moderate income individuals. So let me share my screen and give you a little bit of how we go about that and what it actually looks like. All right, I hope you can see this. So got it, there it is. So what can you utilize our capital for? As you can see, the uses is developing affordable housing development projects, increasing affordable housing, helping individuals at or 80% and below your median income. Actually, the housing fund will do up to 120%, but because we're talking about the barns, we know that 80% and below area median income is where you can utilize those resources. We will do affordable housing projects. Most of our capital on this side is for project-based projects. So affordable housing, but we will also do commercial and community facilities. We have provided capital for a couple of charter schools within the Nashville area. We've also done a daycare center. We've also done a community center as well. So we provide many uses. There are several uses in which you can utilize our capital, not just affordable housing, but it has to be in communities that are low to moderate or serving low to moderate income individuals. Our capital, you're able to utilize our capital throughout Tennessee. Initially, the housing fund was known as the Nashville Housing Fund. When I came on board in 2017, there was really through our strategic plan to really serve more of Tennessee. So we're able to do that, but our primary service area is still Middle Tennessee. So how much can you borrow from us? You can borrow up to 90% of the cost or 80% of the appraised value. So when Ashley was talking about, and the councilwoman was talking about, 50%, well, if they're going to provide you with 50%, then you got to come up with the other 50%. Yes, you are going to have to put some of your own money into it, whether it's 10% approved cost or it's going to be 20% of the appraised value. You're going to have some skin in the game. So you got to start looking at what does your balance sheet looks like, and do you already own the land? Well, the land is considered a part of your equity that you're injecting into it, or do you have other liquid assets that you're able to provide to get you at least 10%? Has to be your own money put into the deal. What are the terms of repayment? It's all on an individual basis on the projects. Some projects are up to 36 months, some of them are 18 months. We're really going to work with you to determine how long it's really going to take you, and really thinking about how long you're going to really need to utilize our capital. And this is also on the single family side and the multifamily side of those type of projects. Again, you're able to utilize our capital acquisition costs. Many of you probably saw in the news a couple months ago that we participated with two other nonprofits and bought 54 acres of land in the Antioch area. We're going to build over 150 units of affordable and market rate housing to be able to support an increase of available housing in the marketplace. But it was acquisition costs. We have to get the land. We know land costs is pretty expensive these days. We also will support construction financing as well, infrastructure costs, soft costs, closing costs, all of those eligible areas. You can utilize our funding to be able to support. We will also provide to not only just nonprofit developers. Ashley talked about a joint venture, for-profit and nonprofit. We need the for-profit entities, and hopefully many of you are for-profit entities. Figure out how to work with the nonprofit sector to being able to get this done. We have fees that are associated, 0.5% for origination fee for the nonprofit developers, and a 1% origination fee for-profit developers. Yeah, the housing fund is a nonprofit, but believe me, we also got to pay staff to be able to provide you with the capital that is needed. So we have fees that are associated with it as well. The interest rate that is on, again, a project by project basis and an organization basis. If you got a great deal of experience and you have been utilizing the housing fund's capital, we're very flexible. We know that interest rates pulls away from the amount of equity or the amount of resources that you can get. So we're making sure that we take into account the type of organization we're working with and what the interest that we will charge on there as well. There is a debt service ratio minimum of 1.15. What we want to do is make sure that that you're minimizing your debt and the cost, because we know that if you're too debt dependent, there could be some issues down the road with overruns and the cost of construction going up. It could cause a problem. So we want to make sure that your balance sheet and the amount of debt that you're taking on is reasonable enough for you to be able to manage it and respectful. Our money, you have to pay it back. So we want to make sure that we're not putting you in a difficult situation, but we're setting you up for success. Again, at least 10% of your own money, whether it's the land costs or your liquid assets that allow you to have some skin in the game as well. And then, of course, the collateral we will take will be based on the real estate or an assignment. When we talk again about the Barnes Fund, again, we know if you've been approved, that means you got a contract of having certain resources. We can take an assignment of those resources and use that as collateral as well, so that we're able, again, to set you up for success and making sure that we're getting adequately reimbursed there also. So we just want to make sure that you have another resource and not allowing it to be a barrier for you to be able to participate in doing development. They talked about, at least having, if a project is 500,000, you need 250,000, and they're only going to do up to 50%. Well, don't write it off and say, well, I can't come up with those other resources there. Hey, the housing fund is an option for you, and we want to be an option for you as well. We have some other great nonprofit partners out there. Pathway Lending is a great resource as well. Affordable Housing Resources, you have Be a Helping Hand, and plenty of nonprofit organizations that can work with you, provide you with the insightfulness about what it takes to really be able to tap into the Barnes resources. If you're a nonprofit, how you tap into the community investment tax credit and taking advantage. I think they were talking about capacity building. Capacity building is key to a lot of this, especially if you're new and you're small. The Red Academy was set up just for that. It's workforce development. The Housing Fund had a Developers Academy years ago, but we're in the business of lending. So we can provide technical assistance to you, but building that capacity, I think the Red Academy will serve it serves a great need for being able to help. And so reaching out to the Urban League and to Ron over at the Red Academy and being able to get that insightfulness of how they can help you and support. And I would say finally, well, actually, before I go there, let me just show you some examples of some of the projects that we do that we have funded in the past, just give you some idea of what we have going on. This right here, of course, the building up top there with the red is known as Owens Place. It was a low income housing tax credit initiated in 2003. It's in the heart of the Gulch. As you can see, nothing was in the Gulch. We initiated that project. We own that project outright. It's 48 units of affordable housing. The rents right now are about $850 a month, and they're considered one bedrooms. We have commercial space on the bottom, design within reach, and we just moved our office out of there, and we're actually going to have another retail in the space down there. In addition to that, we also have, let me see, I got to move you out of the way. We also have some other projects that we do. Again, some townhome projects. We did the lofts on Second. These are projects that we have provided capital to developers who are interested in building some of these units, which has been very successful for us and for the city. Our shared equity products. So we also are developing, we have developed and worked with developers to build some houses for us as well. This is over on Chestnut, 4th and Chestnut. We built these 11 townhome units that are used for our shared equity program. They're home ownership opportunities. Again, just being creative, not only for developers, but also being creative for homeowners and being able to get into units. We've just partnered with a couple other developers on some units that we have acquired for our shared equity program that has been successful as well. Flood happened in 2010. We provided some rehab resources to help individuals rebuild. We're actually initiating another rehab program. Again, we talked about the preservation side, so we're going to need some of you contractors and developers out there to help us with working with existing homeowners to improve and making their homes more energy efficiency. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to us as well. And then again, some of the other projects that are going on, an artist community center that is being developed. We've approved those resources, another multifamily complex that is being developed, and then some single family homes that we're also building and developing there as well. So just give you some great ideas of some of the stuff that we're doing. And if you really need to are interested, we have some contacts out there. Joanna Frost, who works on our team. I'm actually trying to stop it. Who works on, there it is, who actually works on our team, can be more than happy to help you. We continue to lend to for-profit and nonprofit developers, but however we can help with the Barnes Fund and being able to help with that reimbursement. And Ashley, what we might need to do, I might need to sit down with Angie and your team. Maybe if they're already approved through the Barnes Fund, that we streamline our process, because, and that's a partnership right there, because they've already gone through all of that, done everything they need to. We don't need to put any more barriers in their way of being able to get access to these resources. If you have underwritten them, maybe we streamline that process and say, okay, boom, this is what we will do to be able to provide that capital up to a certain level, to make it a lot easier. The reason why people don't, utilize and step into this realm and support is because of what they've heard that they can't do and all of the barriers that are in the way. Well, we got to be in the business of moving barriers out of the way to make it a whole lot easier to get access to capital.
All right. Well, thank you, Marshall. It's interesting because what I wrote down that I was actually going to ask was something that you touched on at the end right there, because I was thinking that which one goes first? Is it the Barnes Fund or is it the housing fund? And can they use one to leverage the other? And is there a way to do it in a better way? And you just said that, and I think that's the whole point of this type of conversation. I think the three of us may have to take this on the road. Ashley is virtual, so maybe we can go tell people. I'm very excited about this conversation. So this is what I wrote down. This is the math. Somebody wants to develop a property, and it's going to cost 500,000. They need 50%, which is 250,000 from Barnes Fund. When it comes to the housing fund, they need to be able to show they have 10%, which is going to be 25,000 of their own money, which can actually be the land value itself. And then the housing fund can actually provide them with 225,000. So for a house or project that's going to cost 500,000, all you really will need to put forward is 25,000. I think this is a win-win situation. It's a solution to us being able to find housing. It allows people that wants to do it to be able to find funding through the housing fund and through the Barnes Fund. And this shows us how you have a good partnership between government and non-profit working well together. So to the folks out there, these are resources that we're trying to put in place. I know the bill is very new, but I hope that those of you that are on today will share with the other people that are not here and make sure that we're putting this out there. We're trying to, and if there's any other barrier that you know about, please contact me, let me know, contact any one of us. We're trying to see how we can work around this. But I think from what we heard today, there's a lot that we can do. Housing is a big crisis in Nashville, but these are tools that can help us start peeling it off little by little. And I'm so grateful to Ashley and Marsha for being there to share that. I looked in the comments, I don't see any question, but before I let you all go, thank you all for indulging with us. I wanted to share a couple more resources that deals with housing that we did not focus on today, but I want you all to be mindful of and to know that we have. Homelessness is an issue in Nashville. And so we're now opening a new office of homelessness. I think the housing division will be talking about that. The mayor proposed to put 50 million into that. And so we did not talk about homelessness a lot today because there's so many other conversations going on. I believe there's going to be a mayoral forum by Open Table that will actually be focused on homelessness, and that issue will be discussed in detail. So not talking about it today is not because we don't think it's part of housing or important. We just want to make sure that this focus on this particular tool in the toolbox that we want to make sure that you all know about and we're taking advantage of. The other thing that I wanted to share is that while the Bonds Fund works with non-for-profit, there's been conversation about how do we get our for-profit developers to be part of the conversation. To solve the housing crisis, we need everybody. I'm glad that Marshall talked about lending to for-profit organization. So one of the things that we've done in council, we have a pilot that is actually looking into how do we tap into using for-profit to do housing. And I'm excited to see how that goes. At the end of the day, it's about creating housing, and I hope we get the opportunity to do that. The last thing that I want to share with you is another bill that I have the honor of sponsoring that I think also helps with talking about housing crisis in Nashville. And this is the eviction right to eviction council pilots that we passed. What we found out is that when people are being evicted from their home and they go to court, 99% of the time the landlord has an attorney, but the renter does not. We have renters in Nashville that do not know their rights, that do not know what they're supposed to do, whereas there's so many laws that protect them, people do not know. What this pilot will do will provide outreach, it will provide education, but more than anything, when people do go to court, this pilot will actually provide a counsel, an attorney to go with people to defend their rights to stay in their home. We do not want people to lose their homes. We want to create new housing, but we want to make sure that people are keeping their homes. Our home is our refuge, right? You lose your home, you lose your dignity. And so we want to make sure that that's not happening. So if you will write this down, I will also put it in the chat. If you want to know about the right to counsel and where to get help, you can call this number 615-244-6610. That's directly to legal aid, and they can talk to you, answer your question, and also provide you an attorney to go to court with you. If you're an immigrant, you have language barriers, you don't know what to do, call Conexión Americas at 615-270-9252. The bill that we passed is doing the pilot through both legal aid and Conexión to make sure that we're reaching everybody in our community. So these are some of the things we're doing about housing. A lot of people are not happy because there's still so much to be done. And I hear you. We're doing little at a time. We need to do more. We need to do better. But the little that we're doing, we need to make sure people know about it and they're taking advantage of it. Again, I'll do one quick check. I'll put those numbers in the chat, and I'll do one quick check on Facebook to see if there's any comments. I see some comments. Ashley John Cooper said thank you. And then Karen Fielder Weaver said, this was very helpful. Thank you, Karen, for joining us. Thank you, everybody that was a part of the conversation. If you have questions, I'm sure you can, I put Rashida's email in there. She will be the one to contact. After this, I'll put Marshall's contact in there too. And then if you need a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and some of the forms that Ashley referred to, if you will email me at zulfat.suara@nashville.gov, I can send that to you. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank Greater Bethel AME Church for allowing me to use this. This is not my office. It's so beautiful back here. I actually came to the church because there's a Noah meeting right here, and I needed a space, and they provided me this nice office. So I wanted to thank them for not just hosting Noah, but also hosting our conversation this afternoon. So thank you also very much. I'm going to let Ashley and Marshall say any last thoughts, anything you want to share before we close it all out. But I'm so grateful for the two of you for spending your Saturday and sharing so much information. It's so useful. I'm going to share it and everybody would know about it. But do you have any closing thoughts that either one of you wants to share with us?
I'll go really quick. I just want to say the Housing Division budget hearing is on Monday, so you can tune into that to hear more about what the Housing Division is doing as a whole on Monday. On Tuesday is our Housing Trust Fund Commission meeting. It's actually my last commission meeting. It's from 2 to 4 p.m. in the Howard office building in the Sunny West room. So you're welcome to come there, say hi, network with folks that attend those Housing Trust Fund Commission meetings, hear what the commission is thinking about, talking about, talk to staff. I'll be there. The other Housing Trust Fund manager will be there who's replacing me, Karen Weaver, and then Rashida will be there as well. Other Housing Division team folks will be there too. And so I just want to say at a base level, always just reach out, start a conversation, even if you feel like it's just something you're contemplating as an organization, even if it's something that you've thrown out as a possibility. Reach out to us, start that conversation. We can talk to you more about it in depth, give you additional resources to read about what we can fund, what we can't fund. And then best of all, we can help connect you to some of those folks in the housing community that already have that experience and already know about the Barnes Fund. And if you are scared or don't know where to make those first connections or who to talk to, we're happy to be that thread. So always reach out to us. We're happy to help in whatever way we can.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Ashley. Marshall.
So let me say, Ashley, thank you for your service to our city.
Yes, yes.
We really appreciate you. You've done a remarkable job in managing the Barnes Fund during your tenure. So we really appreciate it, and we wish you and your husband the very best. And of course, thank your husband for serving our country. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And Councilwoman, we can't say enough about your commitment and engagement to our city and to this space that we call affordable housing and community development. We really appreciate everything that you continue to do to be a strong advocate for us and getting us the resources that we need to be to continue to address this. Again, we've been fighting this fight since 1996. And the crisis isn't going away anytime soon. We don't need to solve the problem. We just need to continue to address the issues as they come up and continue to address them, because it's a tough problem to solve. But I appreciate everything that you've done. And the Housing Fund, we will continue to be a strong supporter of the Barnes Fund and everything housing here in Nashville.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Thank you everyone for joining us. The video will be there. You can share it later. I'm going to transcribe it into my blog and put it on the website. And for those of you that get my newsletter, you will also get this as a summary that will be sent out. Thank you so very much. I want to, I just put quotes about home. And this came up, and I will not be able to tell you the people that said it, but I thought what they said was important. He said, there's nothing more important than a good, safe, secure home. Home is a place you grew up wanting to live and grow old wanting to get back to. There is no place like home where we love is home, home that our feet may live, but not our hearts. Housing is very crucial. Being able to provide housing for our constituents is very essential. It's our job, but it's going to take the government, the non-for-profit, the profit sector, all of us as individuals to make it happen. So thank you also very much. And I thank you for the extra 15 minutes. Next week, we will be talking about education. Education. I'm going to have MMPS board members joining us to talk about their budget and their vision for this year. Again, thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rest of them and see you on the other side. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.